why tbDEX, what prompts any developer to build on top of tbDEX, what prompts any user or financial institutions to use tbDEX as a way of doing financial transactions. We're going to go over high-level concepts, like I mentioned, DIDs and VCs, as well as different tbDEX types. And then we're actually going to get into the meat and potatoes, which is like tbDEX resource and message details. And Kendall and I are going to just sort of role play what it's like to be an Alice and a PFI. That's in a tbDEX message thread. And then at the end, we're going to talk about some things that are still in flight, and take some questions at the end. So let's get started. I think, Kendall, this is you.
Okay, so just briefly up front, to set the stage, to preface with some context. Most people here probably know what tbDEX is, but for those who don't, what tbDEX is, it's a communication protocol for the purposes of liquidity discovery and asset exchange. It's important to note that tbDEX is currently under development. That's one of the reasons why we're here today, which is to give an update. But those are the two goals of what tbDEX aims to achieve. Next slide. In terms of why we're here, this is an important question. Why questions are hard, but I think it's appropriate to frame the question of why tbDEX exists in terms of the context for which it exists within. So tbD is a financial technology company. Our vision is to we believe in a decentralized future that returns ownership and control over your finances, data, and identity. There's three pillars that the block is focused on. The first is open standards, the second is AI, and the third is the Global South. tbDEX in its current state spans two out of the three, right? In terms of it's an open standard, and it's also aimed to support the Global South. Well, I will tease that we have tinkered with the concept of how AI can fit into the situation. Those are some of the overarching visions and missions. I'm not going to give a history lesson on the traditional financial system, but I think most folks can agree that there's room for improvement. So this slide sort of shows some of the contrasts between the old and the new, right? In terms of the old, you have things like it's closed, it's inaccessible, opaque, it's fragmented. That's a big one, and it's a real big one for me, at least, is that it's politicized, and that leads to all sorts of exclusionary outcomes, which are not good for anybody. Some of the driving principles of tbDEX, these are just some to name a few, are very, very much the opposite of those, right? Open, accessible, liquid, discoverable, and the big one I think about is a public good. What we're building here is something that exists in the public, right? And everybody can come and contribute to it. And in fact, we're going to tease some of the things that are out there in the public already. And what's so powerful about that is that, like, anybody who contributes to a public good is making it better for themselves as well as everybody else, right? So everybody's sort of it's something that exists to the benefit of all. So that's my tbDEX sales pitch.
I'm definitely sold after this slide. All right, cool. So now we're gonna kind of wade into deeper depth. First, we're gonna go over the high-level concepts, which involve DIDs, VCs, and of course the tbDEX types. So I'm going to just give a brief overview, as if people don't really know what DIDs and VCs are. Hopefully this is not too rudimentary, but I'm hoping that this will help out anyone who's new. So you can think of a DID as a name tag in your digital backpack. And this name tag can be used to find your digital passport, which is your DID document. So anytime you give someone your DID, they can resolve your DID to find basically a JSON blob that has things about, obviously it'll state your DID. It can tell people how to verify your identity, how to find you online, etc. So that's what VCs are. That's what DIDs are. And so if you think of the DIDs as name tag, passport, in your digital backpack, you also might want to carry some other things, like credentials about you proving why other people might want to do business with you, different attestations that have been given to you by different issuers of these VCs. VC stands for verifiable credentials. And verifiable credentials are a really crucial part of establishing trust between two parties. And the process of trust establishment is called a presentation exchange. And we'll go over them briefly while we're talking about the tbDEX thread messaging back and forth. So now that you have your DIDs and your VCs, you can use any app that sort of, so to speak, speaks tbDEX that connects you to different PFIs. So you can get on different, you can hope to discover like different liquidity pairs or exchanges that, exchange does any wide variety of financial transactions that can happen on tbDEX. All right, and so I covered DIDs and VCs. So before going into tbDEX messaging details, I just want to talk briefly about tbDEX types. So right now there is tbDEX resource and there's tbDEX messages. tbDEX resource is very similar to a storefront, just any physical store. Right now, an example of resource is an offering, which is published by the PFI. So the difference between a resource and a message is that resource is just sort of a standalone thing. Think of it like an advertisement. Think of it as pieces of information that a PFI wants to advertise to anyone who might remotely be interested in what they're selling, who they're selling it to, what their liquidity is, what kind of payment methods they accept for paying in as well as paying out. And this would also talk about the part of VCs that say like, here are the types of VCs or verified credentials that we accept. So if you want to hope to do business with us, then here are the things that you need to have, sort of like list of requirements. Just like, if you walk into, I don't know, like a taco shop and, some people have cash only, like that's a way of saying like, here's like my payment and pay in payout methods that I'll accept or won't accept. So that's what resource is. And tbDEX message is similar to the kind of flow that you'd enter, just as if you go into a real physical store to buy something. There's a thread of conversation that you need to follow if you want to complete the transaction. And the messaging field reflects this sort of conversational nature. So we're going to go over the actual message flow in the next slide. All right, cool. So Kendall and I are going to just jump back and forth here, talking about, just as if Alice and PFI were talking to tbDEX. And so I'll be the PFI and Kendall will be Alice. Cool. So I'm the PFI. I want to tell as many people as I know about me selling cheese, and I accept US dollars. I'll say in my offering, hey, I want to see that you have a debit card or Cash App Pay that you want to use to pay, and I will pay you with cheese. I'll deliver it to your address or something. And then it'll also say things like, if you hope to buy some cheese from me, you better have a credential that says I'm a big fan of cheese. And maybe your phone number, name, and address or something, because you need that to deliver cheese. It'll also say things about like, here's what kind of cheese I have, how much each kind of cheese costs, and all of this information that Alice or the app that she's using that talks tbDEX can take in and display. So Alice can say like, okay, like I want to select this offering, and make a request to say like, hey, how much is this cheese right now? If I wanted to buy, I don't know, like a pound of cheese, that's a lot. But yeah, so that's what offering is.
Okay, so it's important to note that when we jump to RFQ, we're jumping into something slightly different. So, like Jiyoon said, an offering is a resource, and a resource exists. I think of it as a sort of static asset, which at least one of the intents or one of the reasonings for the existence of a resource will be for discoverability. So you can imagine a whole bunch of different PFIs exist, and Alice can crawl around to a bunch of different offerings in order to figure out, where she wants to do business with. And then also, we were just thinking about it earlier, actually today. It could actually be inverted where PFIs could. There's probably room to where PFIs can use resources to discover Alice. We haven't really talked too much in detail, but that's just to help illustrate the concept of resource. Okay, so an RFQ is a message. It's the first message in what we call a thread. Pretty self-explanatory why it's called a thread. The RFQ is in the white paper, we called an RFQ an ask. So you'll see those words and they semantically mean the same thing. RFQ stands for request for quote. Obviously the next one is a quote. This is where Alice takes the offering, the ID from the offering, and basically says, hey, I think this is interesting to me. Can you give me an actual, like a legitimate quote? Whereas the exchange rate in the offering is more of an estimate, sort of a marketed price. This is the general price, but based on the particular time and maybe even some other attributions, the exact price or the exchange rate may be different. So yeah, request for quote. One key thing in the request for quote is the inclusion of a credential. So this is the point where Alice, so at the offering stage, the offering will basically say like, we need these credentials, these VCs in order to do business with you. For example, one of them could be KYC, right? Let's say you're doing business with a financial institution and they require KYC. One of the VCs could be a KYC VC. At the RFQ message, that's where you could insert your VC for your KYC, such that subsequent steps can happen.
Do you want to talk about what KYC is, Kendall?
Sure. So the concept of a VC is a primitive. So it's just a credential of any type. Like, for example, you can have a credential, like your driver's license is a credential, but also technically like more playful things. Like you could imagine your Twitter verification badge is a credential. So the VC is just a primitive. One of the types is KYC, right? KYC stands for Know Your Customer. It's a common regulatory compliance requirement for institutional financial transactions. And particularly when you're talking about the world of the fiat banking rails, such as, USD or Kenyan shillings or you name it, most of these institutions will require a set of information about the customer, know your customer, such that they can operate within the regulatory jurisdiction. But it could also span to other types of credentials. That's the beauty of the VC, is that it's a sort of generic primitive which can be instantiated based off of the given use case.
Yeah, and tbDEX aims to have this messaging protocol that, traditional finance systems and institutions can use, and what they require, as opposed to you doing transactions on a different DEX like BISC, is that they require this sort of establishment of trust. And KYC is certainly one method of doing that. But this establishment of trust, and the way in which Alice sends an RFQ that has her KYC credentials, which might include things like first name, last name, phone number, date of birth, whatever else, really sort of sensitive information, is the reason why we want to implement things like presentation exchange, in the future, zero knowledge proofs, selective disclosures, which we can talk about later. And I wouldn't be the person to ask questions. It'd be more our SSI folks.
So let me just chime in really quick too, because there is something interesting there, which is that things like KYC do have private information, right? We call it PII, personally identifiable information.
Yeah.
So, but it doesn't have to, right? You could imagine tbDEX is you literally go to your local farmer's market, and rather than using cash or rather than using like a credit card, say you had a tbDEX compatible application on both ends of that thing. If you're just buying bananas at a farmer's market, like they probably don't have a KYC requirement, right? So
I
the
hope not.
offering, yeah, me too. The offering may not require any credentials, right? It's a 0 to n data structure. So, but when it does include private information, personally identifiable information, the protocol spec is being designed in a way such that that information is privacy preserving. That's one of the things that we're sort of actively working on right now. We don't need to go into the specific details, but yeah, it's interesting.
Awesome. Okay, so now I think we're wrapped up with RFQ. So I'll do the quote side. So the quote returned to Alice after PFI, takes in the RFQ with, present the verifiable credentials that she presented, meets the criterion that we previously stated in the offering. And the PFI might do any additional business checks to make sure that they can return a locked-in quote amount. So let's say that Alice wanted to buy 2 pounds of cheese, and we want to make sure that we give her 2 pounds of specific cheese costs this much money. Return a locked-in quote amount that has an expiration date time. And it's typical that one RFQ just gets a one quote, so it's a one-to-one relationship.
Yeah, and one more thing about the quote too, it's in the white paper we use the verbiage bid. So once again, like ask bid, RFQ quote, they semantically mean the same things. Okay, after the quote, at this point, Alice has everything that she needs. I have everything I need to execute the exchange. So I have to submit an order message. I don't think we actually have the order message implemented in the repo right now, which we might play around with here in a bit, but it is part of something that we're actively working on. There's actually not much there's not much application relevant information in the order message. Like there's no credential, there's no exchange rate, blah blah blah. It's primarily a command. It's primarily Alice having the option to commit to the quote that she was given.
Yep. All right. So now that PFI has received Alice's order, PFI will now go on to do whatever it needs to do in order to fulfill Alice's order. And in the meantime, PFI should be updating Alice on the status of the order. So this means that PFI might send out multiple order status updates per one order that Alice submitted. And then I'll just end with this: the close message. We also don't have one not as a type defined, I guess, but it's a message that either parties can send to leave the transaction. Obviously, there's protocol level stuff or business validation stuff that codifies that PFIs or Alice's financial app don't send close messages at awkward times to make sure that transactions can flow smoothly and there's no weird cases of Alice submitting a close before she even submitted an RFQ. But that is a message that can be sent from both Alice and the PFI.
That's right.
Cool.
Okay, so we want to talk about a few things that we are actively working through right now. And this list is not as large as the number of things that we're actually working through, but some of the important ones. TB discussed. Yeah. So one of the things that we're actively working through is the notion of tbDEX being transport agnostic. So tbDEX is first and foremost a communications protocol, right? So it's really just a set of rules that need to be abided in order for trust to be built for the purposes of financial exchange or asset exchange. So there's really no reason as to why that communication couldn't occur over any number of transport interfaces. Like for example, TCP, HTTP, DWN messages, which is Web5 tech. All of these things are valid. Technically, you could imagine like you could do it with pencil and paper, right? So you go to the marketplace to buy bananas and you execute tbDEX by writing everything on a piece of paper and handing it back and forth. Obviously, that would be not very practical, but just to illustrate the point of how it works. Like just as like it's kind of funny. The Bitcoin mining is technically just an algorithm, right? And there are people who back in the day would like solve the hash on paper, right? It's a similar concept where it's just a communication protocol. The particular implementation of how those communications are exchanged or transported. It's kind of neither here nor there. The point is that if you want to realize the deep value of tbDEX, I think that it makes sense to cover a broad array of transport protocols that are conducive to particular use cases. Because there's a tbDEX being an exchange protocol works for your marketplace, right? Technically works to go buy bananas, but it could also technically work to do high frequency stock exchanges, right? Wall Street, where you're down to the millisecond requirement. So you can imagine those two use cases are very different in terms of what their transport requirements are. So that's one of the things that we're working through. Developer experience, very important. We have to think about how we have to come to the developers. One of the things, we have a repo, a GitHub repo that is public, and we're going to show you here in a minute. And everybody can go and commit to it or open a pull request, contribute. Currently, we have things like we're building things in TypeScript, but there's no reason why it has to be TypeScript. It could also be other languages. Once again, we have to think a lot about how we go to the people who want to realize the value of tbDEX, and a good developer experience is absolutely crucial. June, do you have any more thoughts on either of these things?
Yeah, I guess just to talk about briefly, like we have been working on some prototypes internally, and one of the things that we realized early on is that if we're going to, like Kendall said, I'm probably just repeating a lot of what you said. If we're going to be able to service a lot of different needs, it's important that we be able to take the tbDEX messaging and be able to put it on using DWeb messages, using HTTP, maybe just straight up using WebSockets or RPC. Any of those protocols, tbDEX will just be really like messaging back and forth that sits on top of any of those layers. So we wanted to make sure that that was a goal that we iterate towards, and we're currently doing that now. The developer experience, I do think this is important. We have, did you talk about JSON schemas? We have JSON schemas that are work in progress right now, but we are hoping to This is our repo where you can go check it out. It's all open source. So we're hoping to have in the future, multiples of these folders that have different examples of, how you might take a JSON schema and implement, tbDEX messaging, tbDEX messaging types in Kotlin or Swift or Rust or something else entirely. So yeah, both of those things are super important. And I'll talk about the last thing, which is PFI discoverability. And like Kendall mentioned, everything is very much in active development, meaning that I foresee at least that we're going to be iterating, and a lot of things are going to be changing in this repo for a good while. But one of the things that we're talking about here is that we have an issue right now where PFIs can't be discovered. And what I mean by that is that Alice, for the time being, has to know the PFIs did in order to be able to find just directly access. So it's not like I can go look in a directory of PFIs and then filter on, I want you to only show me PFIs that will, take my US dollars and exchange them for Bitcoin. And so this discoverability problem is something that we've had a lot of discussions on Discord, as well as internally. So tbDEX is a messaging protocol that's meant for Alice and PFI to communicate, but Alice needs to find different PFIs to do businesses. More importantly, I think, is how does Alice establish trust with the PFI? How can she trust that the PFI is legitimate and they are who they say they are? Obviously, DIDs and VCs, I imagine, will help a little bit with this part. Will we have Yelps and Google reviews of PFIs that emerge on tbDEX platform? And how centralizing of a force is something like that? What will developers that are building financial apps on behalf of Alice, what routes are they most likely to take? And is that a route that sort of tries to mitigate centralization as much as possible? So obviously no solutions yet. We very much welcome any feedback. Social example.
Yes, the answer to that question is yes. I
Yeah.
think that discoverability is somewhat of an emergent phenomenon, and it is predicated on the social discourse. But I think there is room in the native protocol to establish mechanisms for it to be more likely to occur, right? And be more likely to occur, like Jiyoon said, that in ways that are not centralizing. By the way, I have an inkling that AI could actually play a good role here. It's just to tease that out. But yeah, still very much TBD.
Yep.
Well, how could AI help? I don't know. One of the things that AI is good at is parsing through large amounts of data, where humans can parse through data, but it's not really feasible for humans to parse through large amounts of data. So yeah, we've talked about specific instances of AI being useful for credibility as well, in terms of establishing better trust, right? Or building better trust. But I also think in terms of, for the purposes of discoverability, it could be useful to, I don't want to go down a huge rabbit hole here, but one of the things about AI that is centralizing is the hardware requirements. So you have to have huge GPU farms to build AI models. That's true. But the thing is, the models themselves are relatively small and they can, in terms of the gigabyte size, right? So a lot of these AI models can actually fit on consumer hardware, right? So um, there's no reason why those models couldn't sort of naturally proliferate in the wild and spread on consumer devices. And once that happens, it's no longer really centralized. It's up to the developer who or the user who is interfacing with the AI to to use it however they like, right? So I don't know. There's a lot to contemplate on with the application of AI. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Let's see. Oh, here. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's the end of our presentation. Here are our links. We do have an NPM package because right now we're working in TypeScript. So we have an NPM package that you can download, which is pretty neat. And that's actually something we've been using internally as well. We are about to make a whole new set of changes to tbDEX actually. So I imagine we'll have another update after that is done. But for now, you can follow us on the tbDEX protocol repo, which is in the presentation. Yeah, I've linked obviously the white paper and the developer docs for your perusing or some light bedtime reading. So yeah, I think that is everything. Ebony, did you want to take over and taking questions?
Yeah. We need brave souls to ask questions. Ebony, do they get to come up on stage or is it just through text? The question, will the white paper be updated, is a yes.
Yes, it was. I think it actually was updated like a couple months ago, which I didn't know. But I was actually hoping to reach out to Mick to see if we should update the white paper because there's quite a few like verbiages like bids and ask and how and the offering is not there. And the way that we approach bids and ask or RFQ and quote is actually quite a bit different from what's currently in the white paper. So the white paper describes that Alice will send out a bunch of asks, and then hopefully like PFIs will return. Any of the PFIs who are interested will return with a bid. But in the thread, like tbDEX message flow that we described, we are actually talking about making PFI be upfront with what they're offering and giving Alice the ability to peruse different offerings from n different PFIs and to be able to say like I want to send I picked this specific PFI and I'm going to send the credentials and whatever else they require that was stated in the offering. And so by the time Alice sends an RFQ, she has more or less committed to that RFQ, and she has had the time and the ability to peruse, filter per her requirements when she's looking at different offerings after she's fetched different offerings from multiple PFIs. So that kind of selection step has been like shifted up a little bit, and I think it would be good to add that to the white paper.
Yeah, one more thing too on the white paper. I was just looking at it, is it still makes explicit usage of smart contracts. And perhaps we're going to keep that in the white paper, but I'm not sure. Smart contracts can play a role, but I don't know if they're strictly required. But we don't have to go down the blockchain rabbit hole right now. Are you guys considering a cash app market type of thing using tbDEX to give people a chance to play with the protocol by actually making a purchase? Yeah, hopefully, that's the idea. It's permissionless, right? I mean, it's anybody can chime in and participate in the network. Um, and also it's something that there doesn't have to be a singular network. You could have many different instances of sort of networks using tbDEX. So there's that. But
Um, yeah, I just wanted to add that we're currently working on prototypes exactly to prove out this kind of use case. Obviously, internal, and we're working through some stuff where, as you can see in our tbDEX protocol, like the NPM version, we're not even, we're still at like 0 point whatever. So this is still very much not for production kind of use cases and kind of prototypes that we're working on, but hopefully the things that we're working on will build up to something we can, have people actually use in the future, um, like selling swags. That would be pretty cool.
yeah, and just to reinforce a previous point too, and that like being just a communication protocol, like this can span both sort of institutional grade or enterprise grade. You can think of large corporations or institutions, as well as just peer-to-peer, like self-custodial solutions. So if a developer wanted to, they could build a marketplace, like a farmer's market application that is specifically for farmers markets, which makes use of tbDEX. And the beauty of that is that a different developer can come along and integrate directly into that the first developer's application, right? Because you have open interops in between the two. So the potential landscape is very broad here.